Hello, this is the infamous Guy. This subject is about the Hellenistic age. Warning: the contents of this channel you are about to listen to reveals a crucial secret of your life. You should listen to it attentively, for it concerns a subject that is liable to make fundamental changes in your outlook on the material world. Bismillah, let's get started. As-salamu alaykum. The Hellenistic age. Alexander the Great. The only time in which Greece rose to the status nearing that of an empire was the short-lived period of approximately a decade, lasting from the beginning of the conquests of Alexander the Great to his death. Alexander, king of Macedonia, first established control over the Greek mainland before setting out against Persia. In 334 BC, he stormed into Asia Minor with an army of 35,000 men, marched along the Mediterranean coast, then turned north and captured the wife and mother of the Persian Emperor Darius III. He marched south to Phoenicia, destroying the city of Tyre in Phoenicia. He then moved into Egypt and built the city of Alexandria in its stead. Alexander turned once again against the Persians, and following a decisive battle, Darius III fled and was later killed by one of his generals, leaving Alexander as king of Asia, when he inherited the title of the Great, first used by Cyrus. Entry of Alexander into Babylon by Charles Le Brun, 1665. The conquests of Alexander spread this Greco-Jewish culture to much of the known world, where it was particularly influential in the Egyptian city of Alexandria. Because Hellenistic mysticism was a melee of various traditions, apparently Zoroastrian, Egyptian, Greek and Jewish, scholars have struggled to identify its origins, pointing at times to one or a combination of these traditions as the original source. Failing to recognize the Jewish, or Magian, influence in the Hellenistic world has prevented scholars from recognizing that they all had their source in the so-called Chaldean Magi. Though Greek rule had effectively collapsed, Alexander's conquests resulted in the general spread of Greek, or Hellenic culture, an era referred to as the Hellenistic Age. The epoch essentially marked the end of ancient times. No longer would civilization be pursued in isolated pockets. The adoption of Greek as a common language throughout the conquered territories was a unifying element, fostering a cosmopolitanism that contributed in a new epoch of cultural exchange. This confluence of numerous cultures led to a heightened degree of scientific and intellectual interest through the sharing of ideas, and the beginning of an age imbued with a dynamism that continues to characterize the way we interact and communicate today. This cross-pollination of beliefs and philosophies resulted in an age of what scholars call syncretism, producing the ancient mysteries, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism and Hermeticism, all rooted in the influence of the Magi. Alexander III Empire's area regions. Because of Aristotle, his tutor, Alexander was positively disposed toward the Jews. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, as the Greek who most impressed his influence upon the development of the Jewish mind, Aristotle is one of the few Gentiles with whom Jewish legend concerns itself. Aristobulus asserted that Jewish revelation and Aristotelian philosophy were identical. Josephus went as far as to suggest that Aristotle derived his doctrine directly from Judaism. I do not now explain how these notions of God are the sentiments of the wisest among the Grecians, and how they were reared upon the principles that Moses afforded them. Josephus preserved the following passage from Clearchus. In his first book on sleep he relates of Aristotle, his master, that he had a discourse with a Jew, and his own account was that what this Jew said merited admiration and showed philosophical erudition. To speak of the race first, the man was a Jew by birth and came from Coilsyria, Palestine. These Jews are derived from the philosophers of India. In India the philosophers call themselves Kalani, and in Syria Jews. Taking their name from the country they inhabit, which is Judea, the name of their capital is rather difficult to pronounce, they call it Jerusalem. Now this man, who had been the guest of many people, had come down from the highland to the seashore, Pergamus. He was a Greek not only in language, but in soul. So much so that, when we happened to be in Asia in about the same places whither he came, he conversed with us and with other persons of learning in order to test our wisdom. And as he had had intercourse with a large number of sages, he imparted to us more knowledge of his own. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, by introducing Hellenic culture into Syria and Egypt, he had probably more influence on the development of Judaism than any one individual not a Jew by race. Alexander marched through Palestine unopposed, except in the case of Gaza, which was razed to the ground. He is mentioned by name only in the apocryphal Imach. I. 1-8, vi. 2. It is supposed that the book of Daniel alludes to him when it refers to a mighty king that shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, whose kingdom is to be destroyed after his death. Alexander the Great in the Temple of Jerusalem. Josephus also records Alexander the Great purported visit to the Jews in Jerusalem, after having taken Gaza. When Alexander saw Jaddua, the high priest of the Jews, he reverenced God. When Parmenio, the general, expressed surprise at Alexander's act, Alexander replied, I did not adore him, but the God who hath honored him with this high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit, when I was at Dios in Macedonia, who, when I was considering with myself how I might obtain dominion of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly to pass over the sea, promising that he would conduct my army, and would give me the dominion over the Persians. And when the book of Daniel was shown to him, which declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that he was the person intended. At the high priest's request, Alexander granted the Jews the right to live according to the laws of their forefathers, and exempted them from the payment of tribute in the 7th year of release. To the Jews of Babylonia and Media also he granted similar privileges. Out of gratitude, the Jews agreed to name every child born the next year, Alexander. That is why the name Alexander, or Sender for short, became a common Jewish name even to this day. There are numerous legendary accounts found in the Talmud and Midrash about Alexander, including a visit to the regions of the Amazons. The Talmud also recounts that, when the Samaritans had obtained permission from Alexander to destroy the temple in Jerusalem, the high priest Simon the Just went out to meet him. At sight of Simon, Alexander fell prostrate at his feet, and explained to his astonished companions that the image of the Jewish high priest was always with him in battle, fighting for him and leading him to victory. Simon took the opportunity to justify the attitude of his fellow Jews, declaring that they were not rebels, but offered prayers in the temple for Alexander's welfare and that of his dominions. Alexandria, Lighthouse of Alexandria, also called Pharos of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the world and the most famous lighthouse in antiquity. In 264 BC, the Romans removed the Carthaginians from Sicily, prompting retaliation from Hannibal, who marched his troops across the Alps. Roman armies eventually destroyed Carthage, forming the new province of Roman North Africa. Further campaigns brought Macedonia, Greece and Asia Minor under their control. In 63 BC, the year Caesar was elected, the Romans marched into Palestine and seized Jerusalem. After visiting Egypt, where he had an affair with Cleopatra, Caesar campaigned in Asia Minor and North Africa. On his return to Rome in 44 BC, he was murdered, with Octavian and Antony defeating the conspirators. Antony, though, deserted his wife Octavia to join Cleopatra, and Octavian declared war on Egypt and was victorious, following which Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. Artistic rendering of the Library of Alexandria, based on some archaeological evidence. Though Rome dominated politically, it was Alexandria in Egypt, with its great public buildings, a distinguished university, and a library of more than 700,000 scrolls. That was the greatest city of the Hellenistic age. The famous Library of Alexandria was part of the Mausoleum, or museum, founded in the 3rd century BC by Ptolemy I, as a community of learned men organized as a religious cult and headed by a priest of the Muses. The Greek geographer and historian, Strabo, mentioned that it was a large complex of buildings and gardens with richly decorated lecture and banquet halls linked by porticos, or colonnaded walks. The magnificent library not only contained the works of the Greeks and Egyptians, but included Jewish, Babylonian, Zoroastrian, and many other writings, as well as manuscripts from as far away as India. Buddhist monks were part of a special envoy sent by the Emperor Ashoka to Alexandria, and Hermippus was active in Alexandria about 200 BC, and it is assumed that the 2 million lines of Zoroaster, on which he commented, were held there. The greatest of the sciences studied at Alexandria was astronomy, then synonymous with astrology. While begun in Babylon, in coming centuries, it was at Alexandria that the pseudoscience of astrology was furthered. The pervasiveness of study of astrology at Alexandria was such that it came to be regarded mistakenly as having originated there, leading to fantastic claims as to the antiquity of the ancient wisdom of the Egyptians. As early as Aristotle, there is a reference to Egyptian astronomy as equal to that of Babylon, or rather, according to Diodorus of Sicily, it was from the Egyptians that the Babylonians had acquired this knowledge. The Greek magical papyri were written mostly in ancient Greek, but also in Old Coptic, Demotic, etc., which each contain a number of magical spells, formulae, hymns, and rituals from the 100s BC to the 400s AD. Alexandrian mysticism was essentially theurgic. An initiate sought divine union by either ascending to the realm of the transcendent God, or in calling the God down, that he might appear to him in an epiphany. Ultimately, the mystic is confronted with a vision of the true God, who reveals to him the secrets by which he may manipulate the world, in other words, magic. Of particular importance in understanding these practices are the famous magical papyri, in which we see the use of the terms magic, magical, and the practitioners calling themselves magicians. The papyri were first discovered in Egypt, and brought to Europe by Johann d'Anastasy, the Swedish vice-consul in Cairo from 1828 to 1859. This collection contained recipes and formulas for all types of magic, including love magic, exorcism and curses. Although their date is relatively late, dating from the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, they reflect much earlier ideas. Arthur Darby Nock thought that, though they may have picked up Persian features, the magical papyri were Greco-Egyptian in character. Erwin Goodenough though saw the magical papyri as connected to heretical Judaism, combined with a number of other influences typical of late Hellenistic syncretism, pointing out that one god alone is worshipped, while the other gods are reduced to the level of angels or demons. Franz Cumont noted, a great number of Jewish colonies were scattered everywhere on the Mediterranean, and these were long animated with such an ardent spirit of proselytism that they were bound to impose some of their conceptions on the pagans that surrounded them. The magical texts, which are almost the only original literary documents of paganism we possess, clearly reveal this mixture of Israelitic theology with that of other peoples. In them we frequently find names like Iao, Yahweh, Sabaoth, or the names of angels side by side with those of Egyptian or Greek divinities. In the magical papyri, the gods of the underworld are employed as the most important means of fulfilling various magical operations, towards the acquisition of love, wealth, health, fame, knowledge of the future, and control over others. Hecate, identical with Persephone, Selene, Artemis, and the ancient Babylonian goddess Ereshkigal, is one of the gods most often invoked in the papyri. Through the influence of Osiris and Isis, gods like Hermes, Aphrodite, and even the Jewish god Iao, or Jehovah, become gods of the underworld. The Greek god most often invoked is the sun god Apollo Helios. Mithras is mentioned a few times, in each case with Helios or with Zeus Helios Serapis. Other astral deities such as Selene, the moon, the constellation of the Bear, are featured, as well as abstract deities who personify nature, time, destiny, and the all, or Aeon. Though, the god most often invoked is Iao. Also invoked are the Jewish patriarchs, as well as such figures as Psammetichus, Democritus and Osthenes. Lucian, the Roman satirist of the 2nd century AD, offers an account that helps to shed some light on the nature of the eclecticism of the magical papyri. He recounts the story of Menippus, who accomplishes a descent to the underworld through the aid of a magi from Babylon, who, after following a strict vegetarian diet for several days, and offering an animal sacrifice, shouted as loudly as he could, invoking the spirits, one and all, at the top of his lungs, also the tormentors, the Furies, Hecate, Queen of the Night, and airy Persephonia. With these names he intermingled a number of foreign-sounding, meaningless words of many syllables. The burning of the Library of Alexandria caused by Julius Caesar in 48 BC. Ammianus Marcellinus, Roman historian of the 4th century AD, described the circulation of occult ideas at Alexandria. Here, first, far earlier than in any other country, men arrived at the various cradles, if I may say so, of different religions. Here they still carefully preserve the elements of sacred rites as handed down in their secret volumes. He adds, yet even now there is much learning in the same city, for teachers of various sects flourish, and many kinds of secret knowledge are explained by geometrical science. Nor is music dead among them, nor harmony. And by a few, observations of the motion of the world and of the stars are still cultivated, while of learned arithmeticians the number is considerable, and besides them there are many skilled in divination. Finally, though the great library survived a fire set in Alexandria in 47 BC by the Roman Emperor Caesar, whose army supported Cleopatra in a civil war against her brother, it was destroyed in 272 AD in a civil war under the Roman Emperor Aurelian. Hypsistarians, the Chorites protecting the young child Zeus to avoid being devoured by his father Cronos, Saturn, another important Alexandrian community with a Therapeutai. The primary source concerning them is the contemplative life by the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, c. 20 BCE 50 CE. Conybeare, who compares the guild of Therapeutai to the modern Freemasons, argues that the term Therapeutai referred to a religious guild, and the Greek readers of Philo of Alexandria would have viewed the fraternity as a guild or collegia in the Alexandrian Roman sense. The Therapeutai devoted themselves to contemplation of the magical names of God and to mystical allegories of Scripture, in which they utilized gematria and Pythagorean numerology. Philo maintained that the Therapeutai, above all, desired to see, or to have a vision of, the true being. In their night rituals, like the Bacchic and Corybantic ecstatics, notes Philo, they continue in their possession until they see the object of the desire. Philo describes their ceremonies, thus they continue till dawn, drunk with this drunkenness in which there is no shame, then not with heavy heads or drowsy eyes but more alert and wakeful than when they came to the banquet. They stand with their whole faces and bodies turned to the east, and when they see the sun rising they stretch their hands up to heaven and pray for bright days and knowledge of the truth and the power of keen-sighted thinking. And after the prayers they depart each to his private sanctuary once more to ply the trade until the field of their wonted philosophy. Pythagoreans celebrate sunrise by Fyodor Bronnikov, 1869. According to the Greek mythology, the Corybantes were the armed and male dancers carrying shields who worshipped the Phrygian goddess Cybele with drumming and dancing. The Corybantes were the offspring of Apollo and Muse Thalia or Rhetia. In some accounts, They were described as the children of Athena and Helios. Some call the Corybantes sons of Cronus, but others say that they were sons of Zeus and Muse Calliope. The Corybantes' counterparts are the Chorats, 9 dancers who venerate Rhea, the Cretan counterpart of Cybele. In the telling of Zeus's birth in Hesiod's Theogony, when great Gaia came to Crete and hid the child Zeus in a steep cave, beneath the secret places of the earth, on Mount Aegaeon with its thick forests. There the Cretan Chorats' ritual clashing spears and shields were interpreted by the Greeks as intended to drown out the infant god's cries, and prevent his discovery by his father Cronos. Corybantes also presided over the infancy of Dionysus, another god who was born as a babe, and of Zagreus, a Cretan child of Zeus, or child doublet of Zeus. The cult of Cybele was taken over from the Persian worship of Anahita in Cappadocia, now east-central Turkey. Known as the Magna Mater, the Great Mother, Cybele, identified with Venus and worshipped as the goddess of fertility, but also as the mistress of the wild beasts, was taken over from the Persian Anahita. Ultimately, she was Ishtar, who, like Cybele, was often accompanied by a lion. The consort of Cybele was Attis, known as Tammuz, or Adonis, named after the Phrygian name for goat. By 200 BC, the cult of Magna Mater and Attis were introduced into the Roman pantheon and were considered as Roman gods. Their cult seems to have been encouraged especially under Emperor Claudius about 50 AD. On the Day of Blood, some celebrants flogged themselves until they bled and sprinkled their blood upon the image and the altars in the sanctuary, while others are said to have imitated Attis by castrating themselves. The cult of the Magna Mater also involved a ritual called the Taurobolium, where a bull was sacrificed above a pit into which a devotee descended, and was drenched in its blood, as a form of baptism. Bacchanalia. Rare print on vellum. Early 1900s. Artist unknown. Collection of the artist Michele Castagnetti. Los Angeles. Strabo noted that Pindar, like Euripides, regarded the rites of Dionysus as substantially the same as those performed by the Phrygians in central Anatolia, in honor of Cybele. The festival known as the Bacchanalia took place in Attica and Rome in honor of the god of Dionysus, known to the Romans as Bacchus. Originally restricted to women, the festival involved drinking, dancing, masks, and a procession in which the phallic image of the god was carried on a ship on wheels. The festival was prohibited in Rome in 186 BC, perceived as a threat to public order. Livy, the Roman historian who lived at the turn of the first millennium, described the Dionysian rites as they had come to light in the controversy. When wine had inflamed their feelings, and night and the mingling of the sexes and of different ages had extinguished all power of moral judgment, all sorts of corruption began to be practiced, since each person had ready to hand the chance of gratifying the particular desire to which he was naturally inclined. The corruption was not confined to one kind of evil, the promiscuous violation of free men and women. The cult was also a source of supply of false witnesses, forged documents and wills, and perjured evidence, dealing also in poisons and in wholesale murders among devotees, and sometimes ensuring that not even the bodies were found for burial. Many such outrages were committed by craft, and even more by violence, and the violence was concealed because no cries for help could be heard against the shriekings, the banging of drums and the clashing of cymbals in the scene of debauchery and bloodshed. In Phrygia, where numerous Jewish colonies were established, Attis was assimilated to Dionysus Sabazius, which in etymology, that dates back to the Hellenistic period, equates with Yahweh Zebi, the biblical Lord of Hosts. Cumont maintained, undoubtedly he belonged to a Jewish pagan sect that admitted neophytes of every race to its mystic ceremonies. According to Lydus, a Byzantine astrologer of the 6th century AD, the Chaldeans call the god Dionysus, or Bacchus Iao in the Phoenician tongue, instead of the intelligible light. And he is also called Sabaoth, signifying that he is above the 7 poles, that is the demiurgos. In the 1st century AD, Cornelius Labeo equated Iao with Dionysus, from the following oracle of Apollo of Claros. Those who have learned the mysteries should hide the unsearchable secrets, but, if their understanding is small and the mind weak, then ponder this, that Iao is the supreme god of all gods. In winter, Hades; at spring's beginning, Zeus; the sun in summer; and in autumn, the splendid Iao. Plutarch maintained that the Jews worshipped Dionysus, and that the day of Sabbath was a festival of Sabazius. The Sabbath, or Shabbat in Hebrew, is the 7th day of the week, which is related to Shabbatai, the Hebrew name for Saturn, the 7th planet. The Romans named Saturday Saturnides, Saturn's day, no later than the 2nd century for the planet Saturn. A similarity between the Jewish Passover and the rites of Dionysus was perceived by a number of ancient authors. According to Tacitus, the priests of the Jews used to perform their chants to the flute and drums, crowned with ivy, and a golden vine was discovered in the temple, and this has led some to imagine that the god thus worshipped was Prince Liber, Dionysus. In a dialogue, Plutarch presents several speakers enjoying a symposium and discussing the identity of the Jewish god. One of the speakers, Moarigens, proposes that there is reason to equate the Jewish god with Dionysus. Most of the relevant proofs can lawfully be pronounced or divulged only to those of us who have been initiated into the perfect mysteries celebrated every other year, but what I am going to speak of is not forbidden in conversation with friends. First, the time and character of the greatest, most sacred holiday of the Jews clearly befits Dionysus. When they celebrate their so-called fast, at the height of the vintage, they set out tables of all sorts of fruit under tents and huts platted for the most part of vines and ivy. They call the first of the days of the feast tabernacles. A few days later they celebrate another festival, this time identified with Bacchus not through obscure hints but plainly called by his name, a festival that is a sort of procession of branches, or thyrsus procession, in which they enter the temple each carrying a thyrsus. What they do after entering we do not know, but it is probable that the rite is a Bacchic revelry, for in fact they use little trumpets to invoke the god as do the Argives at the Dionysia. The ancient Beit Alpha synagogue in Israel famously features this zodiac mosaic floor. As Goodenough pointed out, that the religion of early Israel was filled with solar and astral elements is now commonplace, however much experts may disagree about the details. While Orthodox Judaism never condoned the practice, there are numerous references to astrology in the Talmud, and indisputable evidence of Jewish astrology has now been provided with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. According to Epiphanius, a Christian bishop of the 4th century AD, both fate and astrology are practiced zealously among them. Essence the erection of the tabernacle and the sacred vessels, as in Exodus 40, 17-19, from Figures de la Bible, 1728. Philo regarded the Therapeutai as a contemplative branch of the Sioe or Essens, who pursued an active life. Conybeare argues that the Essens were a religious guild, much like the Therapeutai. The Essens are believed to have been the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The longest text of the Dead Sea Scrolls is known as the Temple Scroll, written in the form of a revelation from God to Moses, which describes a Jewish temple which has never been built, along with extensive detailed regulations about sacrifices and temple practices. Among the post-Second Temple Essens, who no longer had access to the physical temple, the aim of each member was to become a temple of the Holy Spirit, by passing through 3 grades of initiation. At the first grade, the initiate received an apron as a symbol of purity. At the final grade, he took an oath of secrecy to guard the magical mysteries. Prophecy and the telling of fortunes was practiced by the Essens. According to Josephus, for this purpose they are trained in the use of holy writings, in various rites of purification, and in prophetic, apocalyptic utterances, and they seldom make mistakes in their predictions. Josephus relates that Judas the Essenes once sat in the temple surrounded by his disciples, whom he initiated into the apocalyptic art of foretelling the future. The Essenes also believed in astrology, ascribing one's place in battle based upon the day of one's birth. The Qumran horoscopes, alternatively called astrological physiognomies, are manuscripts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which use the physiognomic features of a person to predict their future. An Aramaic calendrical and astrological scroll from Qumran, 4Q318, Zodiology and Brontology, consists of a 360-day zodiac calendar followed by a zodiacal thunder omen text. Flavius Josephus, 37 c. 100 AD. According to Josephus, apocalyptic texts were in the possession of the Essenes, who were considered by numerous scholars as the originators of the Kabbalah. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, it was in the apocalyptic literature of the 2nd and 1st centuries BC that contained the core elements of the Kabbalah. The word apocalypse derives from the Greek word apokalypsis, meaning unveiling or uncovering. Early apocalyptic works were usually pseudonymous, that is, written by anonymous authors who attributed their work to ancient personages. Apocalypses claimed to unveil secrets previously unknown, often about the destiny of this world and the things to come. They differed from biblical prophecy, where prophets are usually spoken to by God directly. With an apocalyptist, it most usually occurred through an intermediary, an angel. Commonly, an apocalyptist would receive a revelation in visual form, as a dream or ecstatic vision, and sometimes he felt himself transported to some distant region of the earth or to heaven. Anakim the Deluge, 1840, by Francis Danby. The first apocalyptic writings were produced in Palestine in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. Of the apocalypses found among the Essenes were the Book of Jubilees, attributed to Moses, and the Book of Enoch, which was an important early source of the Kabbalah. The Book of Jubilees elaborates on the story of Genesis and Exodus, and is presented as a secret revelation originally imparted by the angels to Moses on Mount Sinai. The Book of Enoch, through its angelology, demonology, and cosmology, also provided important early elements in the development of the Kabbalah. The Book of Enoch is part of a number of works known as the Apocrypha, usually of unknown authorship or of doubtful origin. The Apocrypha, from the Greek word apokryptein, meaning to hide away, refers to a body of biblical literature that was excluded from the Orthodox canon of the Old and New Testament. The Septuagint contained a number of books that later Jewish religious leaders rejected from the Old Testament, but that the early Christian Church preserved as Apocrypha, inserting them between the Old and New Testament. There is no complete list of these works, and some are more important than others. Among those usually classified in Old Testament apocryphal literature are the Psalms of Solomon, the Jewish portions of the Sibbathline books, the Book of Enoch, the Assumption of Moses, the Syriac Apocalypse of Baruch, the Greek Apocalypse of Baruch, the Book of Jubilees, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, the Martyrdom of Isaiah, the Testament of Job, several writings on the subject of Adam and Eve, the history of Johannes Hyrcanus, and various other legendary and apocalyptic works. Still other works survived. The majority of these, in an attempt to give them legitimacy, were attributed to various biblical personalities from the distant past, rather than their actual authors. Because of this falsely ascribed authorship, these works became known as pseudepigrapha. Their literary form makes dating most of them difficult, but the majority reflect doctrines introduced since the Babylonian exile. Most of them date from between 200 BC and 100 AD, and were derived from later copies either in the original language, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, or in translated versions found in archaeological excavations. The Book of Enoch was a pseudepigraphical work, named after Enoch, who, according to the Bible, was the seventh patriarch after Adam and lived prior to the flood. Enoch did not die, but instead, at age 365, walked with God, meaning that he was taken up into heaven directly. After beginning with an account of the fallen angels, known as the Watchers or Nephilim, the Book of Enoch offers a description of the miraculous journey of Enoch, in the company of the angel Uriel, from whom he learns the secrets of creation, the sun, the moon, and the signs of the zodiac. The book teaches of the existence of the Son of Man, the elect one, the Messiah, who, from the beginning existed in secret, and whose name was invoked in the presence of the Lord of Spirits, before the sun and the signs were created. According to Moshe Idol, the Enochian text advocated the use of specific structures, together with incantations, which could bring about the descent of celestial entities and their magical use. While many readers of the Bible over the centuries have struggled with the identity of the sons of God, Nephilim, of the Bible, according to the Apocrypha and the pseudepigrapha, they were identified as fallen angels, referred to as watchers. In the book of Daniel there are 3 references to the class of watcher, Holy One. The term is introduced by Nebuchadnezzar, who says he saw a watcher, a Holy One come down, singular verb, from heaven. The story of the Anakim is often thought to be possibly connected to the Sumerian myth of the Anunnaki, 7 judges of the underworld, the children of the god Anu, who had once lived in heaven but were banished for their misdeeds. Although not mentioned in the Bible, numerous later interpretations claimed that the Nephilim intermarried with the female descendants of Cain, producing the race of Anakim. References to the offspring of Seth rebelling against God and mingling with the daughters of Cain are found from the 2nd century AD onwards, in both Christian and Jewish sources. Examples include Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Saint Augustine, Sextus Julius Africanus, and the letters attributed to Saint Clement. It is also the view expressed in the modern canonical Amharic Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, Henok 2, 1-3, and the offspring of Seth, who were upon the Holy Mount, saw them and loved them. And they told one another, Come, let us choose for us daughters from Cain's children. Let us bear children for us. A similar account is provided in the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, a 6th century Christian extracanonical work found in Jerez, translated from an Arabic original. In Book 2, the sons of God are identified as the children of Seth, in the daughters of men, as women descended from Cain, who successfully tempt most of the Sethites to come down from their mountain and join the Cainites in the valley below, under the instigation of Genun, son of Lamech. This Genun, who is described as the inventor of musical instruments, seems to correspond to the biblical Jubal, is also the inventor of weapons of war. The Cainites, descended from Cain the first murderer, are described as extremely wicked, being prone to commit murder and incest. After seducing the Sethites, their offspring become the Nephilim, who are all destroyed in the flood, as also detailed in Enoch and Jubilees. Similarly, as recounted in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 200 angels known as the Watchers, or Guardians, once descended from heaven to sample the pleasures of earth, and were, according to the Book of Jubilees, led by Mastema, or Satan. It is they who taught men knowledge brought with them in their descent from heaven, magic and astrology. According to the Book of Enoch, the sons of God took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. The text explains, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and of all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered. Impiety increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. Anazarech taught all the sorcerers, and dividers of roots. Almas taught the solution of sorcery. Barkael taught the observers of the stars. Akabil taught signs. Taniel taught astronomy. And Asaradel taught the motion of the moon. To satisfy their enormous appetites, the Anakim roamed the earth, slaughtering every species of bird, beast, reptile and fish. Finally, the ravenous creatures turned on one another, stripping each other's flesh from their bones and quenching their thirst in rivers of blood. As this wave of destruction washed over the earth, the anguished cries of mankind reached four powerful archangels, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael, who upon orders from God brought about a swift retribution. First Uriel descended to earth to warn Noah of a coming flood, advising him to prepare an ark to carry his family and a load of creatures to safety. Raphael then fell upon a leader of the watchers called Shemyaza, bound him hand and foot, and thrust him into eternal darkness. Next, Gabriel, charged with slaying the corrupt race, encouraged them to fight each other. Finally, Michael rounded up the remaining watchers, forced them to witness the deaths of their progeny, and condemned them to eternal torment. Only then did the heavens open up and the waters of the great flood washed away the last traces of the destruction that the fallen angels had wrought. However, the Anakim were not entirely annihilated by the flood. The Book of Jubilees recounted how a remnant of the Anakim was spared. Some time after the flood, Noah learned that evil spirits, born of the fallen angels, were misleading his grandchildren and killing some of them. God then orders the archangels to imprison the demons inside the earth. But Mestama, the devil, pleads with God. Lord, Creator, let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I shall say unto them. For if some of them are not left to me, I shall not be able to execute the power of my will upon the sons of men. And Yahweh replies, let the 10th part of them remain before him, and let 9 parts descend into the place of condemnation. Answer, the angels bind 9 of 10 of the evil spirits in the darkness, but the 10th part remains so that they might be subject before Satan on the earth. The sparing of a number of fallen angels allowed for the legend of the Kabbalah, according to which the race of the Anakim was continued through the descendants of one of Noah's grandsons, Canaan. Merkabah mysticism. Ezekiel's vision of the throne of God, featuring 4 astrological creatures symbolizing the 4 seasons of the zodiac and the wheel inside a wheel, representing the intersection of the ecliptic and the celestial equator. According to Gershom Scholem, a leading scholar of Kabbalah, it is in the apocalyptic literature of the essence that can be found the earliest evidence of Merkabah mysticism, or what he termed Jewish Gnosticism. The main interests of Merkabah literature are accounts of mystical ascents into heaven, divine visions, and the summoning and control of angels, usually for the purpose of gaining insight into Torah. The locus classicus for these practices are the biblical accounts of the chariot vision of Ezekiel and the temple vision of Isaiah. Merkabah involved a complex tradition of visionary architecture, which meditated on the vision of the book of Ezekiel. The aim of Merkabah mysticism was to achieve visions of otherwise invisible mathematical linguistic concepts, in the form of chariots, thrones, palaces and ultimately, the temple itself. What is the ecliptic? The book of Ezekiel opens with a vision of God on his chariots supported by 4 cherubim, a variation of the sun chariots of Marduk, Shamash, Apollo or Phaethon drawn by 4 horses. The cherubim are described as each having 2 sets of wings, the body of a man, but the legs and cloven feet of a goat. Each had 4 heads. While not referred to explicitly in the Bible, these heads can be identified with the 4 seasons of the zodiac and their related signs, demonstrating to what degree astrological influences had already corrupted the Bible by that time. Each creature has the head of a man representing Aquarius, an eagle for Scorpio, a bull for Taurus, and a lion for Leo. Each creature also stands on a wheel inside a wheel, representing the intersection of the ecliptic, resulting from the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and the celestial equator, resulting from the rotation of the Earth on its own axis. Helios in his Sun Chariot Merkabah texts involved elaborate anthropomorphic descriptions of God, known as Shu'er-Koma, which were based on the Song of Solomon, the most important of all Kabbalistic texts. The Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, is a collection of love poems spoken alternately by a man and a woman, symbolizing the mystical erotic relationship between the god and goddess. In the song, the beloved, or the Shekinah, is described as bride, daughter and sister. Originally, she was the planet Venus, the goddess of love and war of antiquity. She also represents the darker aspect of the god, as did Moloch or Saturn in ancient times. She says of herself, "I am black, but I am beautiful." According to the Song of Solomon, 6:10, who is this arising like the dawn? Fair as the moon, resplendent as the sun, terrible as an army with banners. It had been argued that while Gnosticism derived from Jewish mysticism, unlike its Christian counterpart, Jewish Gnosticism did not worship an evil god in the place of God. However, as Alan Siegel has shown in Two Powers in Heaven, it was Metatron who was worshipped as the replacement. After he ascended to heaven, Enoch was known in Jewish Apocrypha as the Archangel Metatron. In Hermeticism, Enoch was also identified with Hermes. He later came to be regarded as the archetypal man, or the primordial Adam, who was equated with the biblical figure of Melchizedek, or the angel Metatron. Becoming the source of the Kabbalah's anthropomorphic doctrine, by being interpreted as the image of God. The idea of Metatron was developed in the Babylonian Talmud to explain Exodus 24:1, where God refers to himself as Lord, in the third person rather than in the first person as me. The rabbis of the Talmud explain that this Lord is Metatron, whose name is like his master's name, because his name is in him. Though, the rabbis also warn not to confuse Metatron with God. However, the myth takes on further features in the later strata of the Zohar, where Metatron and the demon king Samael are combined into one figure, and is therefore seen as embodying both good and evil. Archetypal man, or Adam Kadmon, was also identified with the Tree of Life, which through the influence of the Decad of Plato and Neoplatonism was later equated with what were called the 10 Sephiroth, or divine emanations. Like the ancient Asherah pillars, this god was also depicted as a phallus, representing the pillar or axis of the world, entwined by a serpent known as Teli, representing the constellation Draco, which circles around the celestial pole. Teli is described in the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, written by an unknown author, probably in Palestine between 200 and 600 AD, which mingled Jewish, Pythagorean and Hellenistic ideas. The dragon Teli is the sacred serpent, who, according to the Zohar, corresponding to the evil serpent, watches over humanity and restrains the power of the impure serpent. Teli is the Leviathan of the Bible, the constellation Draco, which governs the world and personifies the axis, or phallic pillar, or Asherah poles, symbolized by the tree of knowledge in the Yetzirah, around which it coils. Through the influence of Merkabah, the system held in common by all the Hellenistic mystery schools came to be the notion of the passage of an initiate through the stages of the 7 known planets, to remove the stains acquired on his soul during its descent into a human body. In order to ascend through the celestial spheres, the initiate had to master techniques of meditation, which included concentrating on the Hebrew scriptures, gematria, as well as breath control, chanted hymns, and certain body movements. In order to bypass the hostile gatekeepers of each sphere, the initiate had to display his seal, or amulets, composed of complex geometric designs that contained magical powers. In the opinion of Sholem, such a mode of ascent, through which the soul ascends to its original home, either after death or in a state of ecstasy, is certainly very old. However, there is no evidence of the notion of an ascent through seven heavens prior to end of the 1st century AD, when it was probably invented, perhaps by Rabbi Akiva, the principal figure of early Merkabah mysticism. On Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud noted that among 4 men who engaged in such mystical subjects, 1 died, 1 went mad, 1 apostatized, and only Rabbi Akiva had a true visionary experience. Of the oldest literary sources of Merkabah are 2 Hekaloth texts, the lesser attributed to Rabbi Akiva, and the greater, to his colleague, Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha. As Sholem remarked, similar dangers in the ascent of the mystic are described in the Liturgy of Mithras, of the magical papyrus of Paris, where the description of the ascent shows many parallels with the account given in the Greater Hekaloth. Gnosticism. A print from Bernard de Montfortin's L'Antiquité expliquée et représentée en figures, Band 2, 2p. 358 ff plaque 144, with different images of Abraxas. Gnosticism is the name used by scholars to refer as a group to the various heretical Christian sects that emerged at Alexandria. An entire library of Gnostic documents and Coptic translations from Greek originals was discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. Our knowledge of the Gnostics stemmed mainly from their opponents, early church fathers like Irenaeus c. 185, Hippolytus c. 230, and Epiphanius c. 375. The word Gnosticism is derived from the Greek gnostikos, meaning one who knows. What he knows is gnosis, the wisdom attained through revelation. In common with all Hellenistic mystical systems, the Gnostics believed that there is a divine spark in man that has descended from the divine realm above, which has fallen into the world of fate, birth, and death, and that it can be awakened by its divine counterpart because of a revelation, or epiphany, and then be reintegrated into the spiritual world. The Gnostics applied a radical dualistic interpretation to Christianity, interpreting the Bible in reverse, by pitting the creator of the universe, referred to as the demiurge, against the true God who lies outside of creation. Demiurge was a term first used by Plato in the Timaeus as the agent other than God who takes the pre-existing materials of chaos, arranges them according to the models of eternal forms, and produces the physical world. As such, the Gnostics typically believed that all morals imposed by God were intended only to oppress man. To free themselves from the cycles of reincarnation, the Gnostics believed, they needed to experience everything, falsely considered evil by the ignorant masses, including murder, adultery, incest, cannibalism, pedophilia, and the ingestion of various bodily fluids and excrement. Thus was the philosophical basis for the practice of black magic. This was despite the fact that there were clear condemnations of this art found in the Bible, as in Jeremiah 50, 35-36, a sword is on the Chaldeans and the people of Babylonia, and on her rulers and on her wise men. A sword is on the soothsayers, and they will become foolish. Therefore, as explains Attilio Mastrosank, in From Jewish Magic to Gnosticism, in Gnostic thinking, therefore, the science of the Chaldeans was bound to be valued as a form of knowledge, precisely because it had been forbidden by the Creator. The Gnostics believed there was the good from which a variety of eons, or emanations, were given off. The universe, according to the Gnostics, was viewed as consisting of concentric spheres, of which the Earth was the center. These spheres were marked by the circular orbits of the planets, each governed by an archon, a deity hostile to spiritual men. Beyond them was the sphere of the fixed stars known as the pleroma, or totality. It was made of 30 eons, each corresponding to the 30 days of the month. Within these were the signs of the zodiac whose earthly equivalents were the 12 apostles. The soul of man is pure spirit placed by the good in a body of corrupt matter created by the demiurge. To be reunited with the good, the mystic must gain secret gnosis, which will allow him to bypass the eons, as well as the most inferior, the demiurge, creator of the material world. As reported by Clement of Alexandria in Exhortation to the Heathen 78.1, the primary function of Gnostic revelation was to free spiritual men from astral determinism, for according to the Gnostics, until baptism, fate is real, but after it the astrologers are no longer right. A central doctrine of Gnosticism was that of the passage of the soul through the planetary spheres, the route through which was opened by the Savior, knower of the sacred names by which to appease the gatekeepers, or archons, that impede the soul's ascent. Therefore, the mystical system of Gnosticism held obvious parallels to other schools of Hellenistic mysticism, namely the mysteries of Mithras, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonism, but also with the early Jewish mysticism of the Merkabah, or which Gershom Scholem identified as Jewish Gnosticism. Scholem indicated, the fact remains that precisely these ideas were affirmed in the heart of an esoteric discipline within Jewish tradition, and not only among Jewish heretics, even though the role of the pagan planet angels is here assumed by other archons. These archons threaten the ecstatic visionary at the gates of the seven celestial palaces, and, entirely in keeping with the doctrines of various Gnostic writings of the same period, can only be overcome and compelled to permit him to pass by the display of a magic seal, through the recitation of hymns, prayers, etc. One can still discern plainly the relation to late Jewish apocalyptic writings, whose ideas evidently form a plausible transition to both Jewish monotheistic Gnosticism and the heretical Gnosticism that tended toward dualism. It is now largely accepted by scholars that Christian Gnosticism had its origin in Merkabah mysticism. Scholem explained, in the 2nd century Jewish converts to Christianity apparently conveyed different aspects of Merkabah mysticism to Christian Gnostics. In the Gnostic literature there were many corruptions of such elements, yet the Jewish character of this material is still evident, especially among the Ophites, in the school of Valentinus, and in several of the Gnostic and Coptic texts discovered within the last 50 years. These opinions were confirmed by several ancient sources. For example, in fragments quoted from Eusebius, we know that Hegesippus argued that the Gnostics were inheritors of various Jewish or Baptist sects, such as the Essenes. Philostrius, the 4th century AD bishop of Brescia, numbers the Gnostic sects of the Ophites among the sects that flourished in Judaism before the advent of Christianity. According to Moshe Idol, far more than did scholars in the first half of the 20th century, contemporary scholars of Gnosticism refer to Jewish influence on the emerging Gnostic literature. The studies of Jill Quispel, George McRae, B. Pearson, Guy Gedalius Strumser, and Jarl Fossum have altered the earlier Iranian Egyptian Greek explanations of Gnosticism. As Hans Jonas, the renowned scholar of Gnosticism, pointed out, some connection of Gnosticism with the beginnings of Kabbalah has in any case to be assumed, whatever the order of cause and effect. The way midot, or qualities of God, such as wisdom, understanding, knowledge, truth, faithfulness, righteousness, etc., for the Gnostics became the eons, the powers and the emanations of God which fill the pleroma, the divine fullness, is paralleled in the tradition of Marase Bereshit. As in Gnostic literature, there is a magical and theurgic aspect to the technique of ascent in Merkabah, and there are very strong connections between Merkabah literature and Hebrew and Aramaic theurgic literature of the period. It is very similar to a number of important texts preserved among the Greek magical papyri and to Gnostic literature of the Pistis Sophia, which originated in the 2nd or 3rd century AD. Therefore, to the Ophites, also known as Sethians, a Jewish baptismal sect in the tradition of the Essenes, that flourished around the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD, the God of the Bible is really the evil God. According to the Ophites, Ialdabaoth, or Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, was proud, ignorant and vengeful. Though there were powers above him, he was covetous of the supreme power and claimed himself to be the only God. Dissatisfied with his creation, he wanted to destroy his work through a woman, Eve. But Sophia liberated man by sending a serpent that led him to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, forbidden to them by Ialdabaoth, to keep man ignorant. Through Sophia, Adam and Eve acquired knowledge of all things and began to turn away from their Creator. Ialdabaoth cast Adam and Eve out of paradise, and after Cain and Abel, they gave birth to Seth, who was of a superior race, and whose sons were the sons of God. The sons of God intermarried with the daughters of Cain and caused such corruption that Ialdabaoth unleashed the flood, but Sophia saved Noah. When the world was repopulated, Ialdabaoth chose Abraham, establishing a covenant with him that if his descendants served him he would grant them the earth. These were later led out of Egypt by Moses, who gave them the law. While the prophets were servants of Ialdabaoth, Sophia allowed certain words to infiltrate their prophecies. Such words referred to the primordial man, the Eon, and to the Christ, for Sophia intended, without Ialdabaoth's knowledge, to bring about the births of Jesus and John the Baptist. Abraxas is a word of mystic meaning in the system of the Gnostic Basilides, applied to the Great Archon, and which was also found in the Greek magical papyri. Basilides was an early Christian Gnostic religious teacher in Alexandria, who taught from 117 to 138 AD. In the system described by Irenaeus in his Adversus Hereses, the ruler of the 365 heavens is Abraxas, and for this reason he contains within himself 365 numbers. The 7 letters spelling its name may represent each of the 7 planets, and may be related to abracadabra. A vast number of engraved stones are in existence, to which the name, Abrasax stones, were given. The Abrasax imago proper is usually found with a shield, a sphere or wreath and whip, a sword or scepter, a cock's head, the body clad with armor, and a serpent's tail. A combination of Abrasax with Jewish symbols is predominant, in the form of inscriptions, such as Iao, Eloi, Adonai, Sabaoth, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael, and many others. Abrasax is also sometimes combined with Persian deities. Chiefly, most commonly with Mithras. Abrasax is represented sometimes with Egyptian motifs, as a figure with the sun god Phra leading his chariot, or standing upon a lion borne by a crocodile. With Grecian deities, Abrasax is sometimes in connection with the planets, especially Venus, Hecate, and Zeus. Neoplatonism, Plotinus in the red toga, behind Zoroaster holding the starry globe, in Raphael's The School of Athens, 1509, essentially, the Gnostics combined the terminology of the Neoplatonists and the mythology of the mysteries with Christianity. Neoplatonism and the emergence of the mysteries of Mithras were closely connected to the royal family of Emesa, today Homs in Syria, a dynasty of priest-kings who formed a powerful and influential aristocracy. Emesa was renowned for the Temple of the Sun, known as Elagabalum, a derivation of Baal, was adored in a shape of a black stone. Around 64 BC, Pompey the Great had reorganized Syria and the surrounding countries into Roman provinces, and had installed client kings, who would be allies to Rome. One of those client kings would be Sampsasramus, the founding member of the priest-king dynasty of Emesa, who lived in the 1st century BC. The Emesa temple to the sun god El Gabal, with the holy stone, on the reverse of this bronze coin by Roman usurper Uranius Antoninus. Philo of Alexandria, c. 20 BC, c. 50 AD, also called Philo Judaeus, the greatest representative of Hellenistic Judaism. Philo of Alexandria, c. 20 BC, c. 50 AD, also called Philo Judaeus, the greatest representative of Hellenistic Judaism. The influence of Greek thought in the Hellenistic age derived primarily from a school of philosophy developed at Alexandria and thought to issue from Plato, known as Platonism. It appears that Plato, in his later years, became increasingly devoted to the teachings of Pythagoras, and that he finally came to view his idea of forms as numbers. Plato arrived at a system of opposed first principles, and a triple division of levels of being, which granted a central position to the role of soul, both world soul and the individual soul. Developing the doctrine of the Pythagoreans, as first principles, Plato established the one and the indefinite dyad. The one, or monad, is an active principle, imposing limit on the formlessness of the opposite principle, the dyad. The dyad is a duality, that on which the one acts, but it is also the irrational aspect of the soul, and the underlying substance of the universe, the receptacle of the timeus. Essentially, as explained Xenocrates, Plato's successors to head of the academy, the monad and the dyad are the philosophical rendering of the pagan trinity. The monad represents the Father, while the dyad represents the dual-natured goddess, taken from the ancient Trinity. By acting on the dyad, the one generates the form numbers. First, the dyad produces the number 2, by doubling the 1, and then produces the other numbers by either adding to 2 and to each successive number the 1 or itself. However, Plato took only those numbers up to 10 as constituting forms. A special importance was placed by Plato, as it was by the Pythagoreans, on the primal numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the tetracties, and their sum total, 10 or the decad. These 4 also have a geometrical aspect. 1 is the point, 2 the line, 3 the triangle or a plane, and 4 the solid, in the shape of a pyramid. The 4 basic numbers assume the geometric aspect in world soul, from which the 4 dimensions are projected upon matter, through combinations of basic triangles, to form the 4 elements. The next phase of Platonism, or Middle Platonism, emerged as the result of a new influence, that of Neo-Pythagoreanism, if in fact the two movements were not the same. A curious series of texts had emerged in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, claiming to be the works of the original Pythagoreans. It was in this period that the myth of Pythagoras as the student of Oriental wisdom took shape, reflected later in the biographies by Diogenes Laertius, Porphyry and Iamblichus. However, according to John Dillon, noted scholar of Middle Platonism, only certain works attributed to the original Pythagoreans, namely Philolaus and Archytas, are possibly genuine, though as far as the other works are concerned, much about them remains obscure and little is known as to who wrote them and why. One of the most important exponents of Middle Platonism was the Greek-speaking Jewish philosopher of the 1st century AD, Philo of Alexandria, also called Philo-Judaeus, the greatest representative of Hellenistic Judaism. Although a devout Jew, Philo attempted to rationalize Judaism with his version of Platonic philosophy. The Bible, to Philo, was compatible with Platonic philosophy, for according to him, perhaps in reference to the legends reported by Iamblichus or Artapanus, Plato was a follower of Pythagoras, and Pythagoras had been a follower of Moses. The most important innovation of Middle Platonism, according to John Dillon, was Philo's placing of a transcendent God, equated with the God of the Old Testament, above the monad and the dyad. These notions, though, hold striking similarities with those regarded as the early developments of the Kabbalah, the monad representing the primordial man, the dyad the Shekinah. In fact, Philo praised the essence, and in the contemplative life, he describes the rites and habits of the therapeutai, and in support of his ideas, he often used the phrase, "it is said," presumably referring to Jewish traditions. For example, it is said that Moses was enchanted by the music of the spheres when he was receiving the revelation on Mount Sinai. Ultimately, In the opinion of Moshe Idol, a leading modern scholar of the Kabbalah, there seems to be extant evidence for the existence of Hebrew traditions that may mediate between Philo's views, or other ancient Jewish traditions parallel to Philo, and the emergent Kabbalah. Below the supreme God, the monad becomes the Stoic logos, the active principle of God's creative thought. To Philo, he who drives the chariot of the powers is the logos, and he who is born